Coming up, the story of the song that started as a challenge between a producer and a legendary frontman. The argument was it was much easier to write a disco hit than it was to write a rock hit. We go behind the masks to reveal how the world's most famous glam rock band created their biggest international hit. This crazy story is coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you were part of the Kiss Army growing up, you're gonna dig this channel. Musical time machine, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Make sure that you subscribe below right now, hit the red button so that you know when our latest and greatest interviews and videos drop. So between 1974 and 1977, the band Kiss was one of the biggest box office draws around the world. But after a string of 4 consecutive top 25 singles, Kiss's commercialism began to decline, and the band became fractured from egos and rock and roll debauchery. It was 1979, it was the height of the disco era, when the masked leaders of the rebellious youth of the 70s hit a crossroads. It seemed that the studded leather costumes and the painted faces that for years had fascinated millions of soldiers in the Kiss Army was becoming a dying ember. They hired an outside songwriter for the very first time and put 4 on the floor to start a massive bonfire called I Was Made for Lovin' You. In 1978, Kiss drummer Peter Criss released a self-titled solo debut album produced by none other than Vini Poncia. The album didn't sell well, stalled at number 43 on the Billboard Top 200 album chart, but Peter enjoyed working with Vini so much that he recommended that Kiss hire Vini as their producer for their 1979 album Dynasty. Here's the thing, if you looked at Vini Poncia's history as a producer, the last band you would expect him to work with in the studio would be Kiss. I mean, Vini worked with a ton of notable artists, but about the closest he came to heavy rock and roll was producing Ringo Starr's 1973 LP, Ringo. Featuring the number 1 hit Photograph and Ringo's cover of Johnny Burnett's rockabilly tune, You're 16. That also reached the top of the Billboard Hot 100. You're 16, you're beautiful. Vini also produced Ringo's follow-up LP, Goodnight Vienna, along with the co-writing Leo Sayers' chart topper, You Make Me Feel Like Dancing in 1976. Now, there was no question that Vini knew how to craft a hit pop song, for sure, but working with softer fare like Melissa Manchester and a solo record by TV's Wonder Woman, Linda Carter, it seemed like an image killer for a band like Kiss that had legions of loyal followers. Despite the odd pairing, Vini was named producer for the Dynasty record, actually. And the first thing that Vini pushed for was for Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons to collect material that could get them back on the radio. Vini felt very strongly that Kiss needed to dig deep and compose, get this, a disco hit. Paul Stanley, who was the band's primary lyricist, of course, he got a good laugh from Vini's dig deep directive. Can you imagine what Paul was thinking? Yeah, right, disco and Kiss, pretty far apart in the game of musical chairs. Or were they? First of all, Paul Stanley had no respect for the lyricism associated with disco music at that time, and he shot back with an indignant retort. Writing a disco hit is easy, Paul insisted. It's much simpler to write a disco hit than it is to write a rock hit. And this became a challenge for Paul to show that he could not only write a great disco song, but that he could do it in a flash. And then Paul did something that Kiss had never done up to this point. He went outside of the 4 core members of the band to write a hit. Along came Desmond Child, a relative unknown that Paul used to watch perform in small nightclubs around New York City with his group Desmond Child and Rouge. Now, Paul would often hang out backstage with Desmond Child and his 3 female vocal companions. Desmond didn't know much about Kiss, but he thought of them as being a band for kids. One night after a show at the Bottom Line in the Village area of Manhattan, Paul invited Desmond to write a song together. A few days later, Paul and Desmond got together to write the tune that became I Was Made for Lovin' You. According to Desmond, there wasn't a conscious decision to write a disco song per se. They wanted a dance song with guitars so that it wasn't a complete departure for Kiss. The idea was to come up with something different, something that would be played on the radio, and also in the deluge of dance clubs across the world over. At the SIR studios in New York, Paul began to write lyrics and chords for I Was Made for Lovin' You, while Desmond played the initial draft on a guitar to follow along. Even in its raw form, though, Desmond could hear the makings of a hit song, a hit record. As Paul predicted, the track developed very quickly. And when Desmond left the studio, after a mere 2 hours, Paul turned to his producer, and he and Vini created the chorus of the song that was admittedly inspired by the Motown classic Standing in the Shadows of Love by the Four Tops. When you listen to the hook of the two songs back to back, pretty similar. It wasn't something that Paul and Vini talked about, but the melody of I Was Made for Lovin' You, that was very similar to Blondie's mega smash Call Me, composed by Debbie Harry and Georgia Moroder. Of course, a genius of dance pop and of synth pop really later. I Was Made for Lovin' You was released in May of 1979, while Call Me dropped 8 months later in January of 1980. It could have been unconscious borrowing from one artist to another that has happened throughout the history of recorded music, but check this out. Recording I Was Made for Lovin' You was surrounded by an ironic subtext. The tension between the band members was palpable, starting with Peter Criss. Although Peter appeared in the music video for I Was Made for Lovin' You, and he was on the album cover, he didn't play on the recording of the song. Peter was in pretty bad physical condition because of his drinking. In fact, Vini Poncia, the man that Peter lobbied for the producer gig, deemed him unfit to perform, and he was replaced in the studio by session drummer Anton Fig. Now, a year before the Dynasty recording sessions, Kiss lead guitarist Ace Frehley had also put out an eponymous solo record that Fig also played drums on. Now, unlike the solo releases from all three of his bandmates in '78, Ace was the lone Kiss member to score a hit from his solo LP. Ace's rendition of Russ Ballard's New York Groove climbed to number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100. Just missing the top 10, but a good hit nonetheless. By the time the Dynasty album was released, Ace was also on the Stanley Simmons chopping block. The foursome just weren't clicking as a tight unit at the end of the 70s, and there's the dawning of the new decade. But it was Ace's guitar parts on I Was Made for Lovin' You that were critically vital to fend off a mutiny by the Kiss Army when the single was released. As we continue to break down this track, I do want to mention our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses that you see here on my face every day. Zenni, it's so cool. You can get a complete pair of prescription glasses for just $6.95. Seriously, go to Zenni.com, design your best look, and have them delivered right to your door. Zenni.com. Ace's ripping solo on this track is one of the best of his career, in my opinion. Paul's serpent-tongued partner, Gene Simmons, he really liked the opening lyrics of I Was Made for Lovin' You when Paul introduced the song to him. Tonight, I want to give it all to you in the darkness. There's so much I want to do, and tonight I want to lay it at your feet. I want to lay it at your feet. Because girl, I was made for you, and girl, you were made for me. However, Gene's enthusiasm turned to dismay when Paul divulged the vocal part that he had in mind for Kiss's co-founder. When Gene asked what part he was supposed to sing, Paul said, do, 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 to which Gene responded, "You're killing me." He may like the money that the song puts in his bank account, but Gene has never stopped hating performing this song during Kiss concerts. In so many words, Gene called it singing like his grandmother. I Was Made for Loving You emphatically demonstrated Paul Stanley's ability, though, to sing in a sustained falsetto. I don't think Paul or Gene's grandmother could have hit those high notes. I mean, Paul sure split his vocal cords on his performance. Paul had a higher vocal range than he was really given credit for, often reaching the challenging F5 octave. One of Paul's most underrated performances for me is his vocal on I'll Fight Hell to Hold You from Crazy Nights. I Was Made for Loving You was released to mixed reviews in 1979 with critics and with Kiss's diehard fans. The track was abhorrent to Kiss purists, which likely contributed to the song being denied a top 10 finish in America, where it narrowly missed at number 11. But to the rest of the world, it was a catchy, irresistible smash, rising to number 1 in 23 countries. By far the biggest international hit for Kiss. And after Beth, it was their second gold-selling single. It's also their most streamed song of all time. You can check that out for the numbers. Now, the Dynasty tour in 1979, that was billed as the return of Kiss, and the band pulled out all the stops on stage. It was the tour that unveiled the famous flying stunt by Gene Simmons. It was also the first tour to feature Ace Frehley's glowing guitar, and the shooting bottle rockets were taped from the back of the headstock. The Dynasty tour, it also included Paul Stanley putting on a headset that shot lasers out of his left eye, which was a technologically advanced version of the Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Opera video from 1978.
He's convinced you did it, but the investigation's a stroke.
Stanley and Kiss's late manager, Bill Alcoin, he scrapped the idea because of the stunt's inherent danger. The remarkable success of I Was Made for Loving You, that was the springboard for Desmond Child as a highly sought-after lyricist and composer. Kiss also enlisted Desmond's talents to collaborate on songs for the albums Animalize, Asylum, Crazy Nights, and Hot in the Shade as well. Paul Stanley recommended Desmond to John Bon Jovi when John was preparing for Bon Jovi's landmark Slippery When Wet album that sold over 12 million copies here in the US. Desmond co-wrote Bon Jovi's biggest hits from Slippery When Wet, Living on a Prayer, also You Give Love a Bad Name. He co-wrote Bad Medicine from the follow-up album. Amassing a long list of pop gold, Desmond Child also co-authored Dude Looks Like a Lady, An Angel for Aerosmith, Livin' La Vida Loca for Ricky Martin, also hits for Cher, Katy Perry, Joan Jett, and the Blackhearts, just to name a few. As of 2021, Dynasty has sold just over 1.5 million units on the strength of the popularity of I Was Made for Loving You and their innovative live tour to support that record. The album that came next was Kiss Unmasked. That came in 1980. It would be the first Kiss album without Peter Criss, who was officially voted out of the band by the other three members just prior to making the record. Criss didn't perform on the record, but he was still featured in the cover art for Unmasked, and he appeared in the video for Shandy, which was the lead single from the LP that actually stiffed at number 47 in the US. It did go top 5 in Australia, New Zealand, and Norway, though, and it went all the way to number 1 in Argentina. Shake it loose, we both could use the right. 2 years later, in 1982, Ace was the next member from the classic lineup to leave Kiss. Of course, he was replaced by Vinnie Vincent. Ace and Peter rejoined Kiss for their lucrative reunion tour. That was in '96, if you remember. Well, I suppose Paul Stanley ultimately won the bet that he made with Vinnie Poncia, that writing a disco hit was easier than writing a rock hit. Stanley and Childs finished the song with Vinnie's assistance in short order, and it was exactly the kind of song that they were all hoping for, a hit song. In interviews and quotes from various bio literature, Gene Simmons has expressed his absolute disdain for I Was Made for Loving You, which actually prompted Desmond to call his old friend Paul Stanley. Desmond was both hurt and confused when he called Paul, wondering why anyone from the band would criticize the song that was one of their biggest hits, if not their biggest hit. Criticize your enemies, not your friends that put money in your pocket, is what Desmond said and pleaded. Man, that's just Gene, you know? I don't feel that way. That's how Paul responded. Now, Gene actually did feel a little remorse for his condemnation of I Was Made for Loving You, and he left a short, sweet voicemail for Desmond. It went like this: Desmond, it's Gene. Sorry. And then he hung up. For Gene Simmons, that was as close as you were going to get to an apology. To me, I Was Made for Loving You, it gets better with age. With or without the glam, the makeup, or the costumes. I Was Made for Loving You is a good song from one of rock's most notorious showmen and one of rock's most prolific songwriters. Listening to that song in the 21st century without any of the disco backlash or the image controversy that Kiss faced in 1979 to affect your judgment, the track is an ebullient jam with an incredibly infectious groove, and I can't get enough. No, really, if it's a standalone song without any prior knowledge of Kiss and their legacy before or after, you have to admit that it's a great pop song. For me, there's no such thing as a guilty pleasure, as I've said. It's either good or bad. And I Was Made for Loving You is a good pop song by a great rock band. Leave us a comment about Kiss and this song I Was Made for Loving You. What do you think? Do you think they sold out? Do you like the song? What do you think about it by listening to it without thinking about Kiss just as a standalone pop song? Let's talk about it below. What are your memories about it and memories of Kiss? Make sure to click on the subscribe button below if you want to be a part of this community, if you like the video. We'd love to have you. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth.